Greetings all, welcome to another session here of Tuzi Talks. Today we're going to be investigating a little bit more about the history of English, and we're going to be jumping into some of the medieval times here. And so we're going to be looking at the contact and conflict that resulted when we were moving from Old English into Middle English. Because of the conflicts and the contact that was going on through the people that were on the island, and of course the people that came into the island through invasion. So that's what we'll be looking at for the most part of today. Just want to let you know that the majority of the materials that you're going to be looking at are from that textbook right over there. And you can get that at Barnes & Nobles, or you can get it at Amazon online and things like that. Okay, so let's first of all just begin looking at a little bit of what's going on as far as the languages that are being used here in this time of multilingual Middle English era. In order to do this, now we had to go back and look at a lot of the materials that were written down at the time to try to get a picture of what was going on. And Mugglestone in the text tries to look at a variety of different what they call snapshots just to get a picture of what's going on with language. It's not like today where we have internet and we've got the ability to do a lot of analysis, although later on as we move forward into early modern English, you're going to see people start using databases to try to analyze what's happening to language. Quite interesting stuff, but that's into the future. Right now we'll look at some snapshots. First we'll look at Venerable Bede and the writings that he was doing, and it was during his writing that you see he uses a variety of languages. He is obviously using the Old Middle English, more Middle English at the time. He's also using British, which would be the lower level of the country. It's more Celtic or Celtic, depending on your background. There's also Welsh that he has included in some of his writings, as well as Irish, which obviously comes from the island next door. And then at the same time there is Pictish, which comes from the north, where the Picts and the Scots lived. And lastly, there's Latin, which is the language of the church, which generally came from the south and moved its way northward. And so, looking at the writings of Venerable Bede, you see a lot of these different languages that are being used and or mentioned and or borrowed. The next one on our list would be King Adred, who lived during the mid-900s. And if you look at the writings of his court and of him, you'll note that a lot of the language that was used in the writings was Norse, which is quite interesting, being that was not a language that was not written as much during this era. He also had writings that were written, again, in Celtic or Celtic, the southern part of the island language, primary language. And lastly, he wrote in Anglo-Saxon and then, of course, in Latin. So again, the language of the church would be Latin. Anglo-Saxon would be the language of the aristocracy, and the language of the invaders who had come in part way through in the northern sections, and you'll see them come in totally later on in his in this era. And lastly, we'll look at monk Jocelyn, who wrote. And he was, again, part of the church, so he wrote primarily in Latin. But again, he was working with people in the country, so he also wrote in English and in French. So we see these three different authors, three different people who are writing during this time, and you can see a plethora of different languages that are available on this island of England. So you have all these interesting languages that are going on here. Some from the south, some from the north, but they're all converging and they're all having some type of interaction as we go forward. Now, as we look at the overall languages that are here, we have the Norse, who were the Scandinavians. That was the language that, again, that came in more from the mid-north, not the upper north, but the mid-north. We have the language of the church, which was Latin. We have the language of those who were in the northern part would be the Pictish and the Irish. Of course, the Irish are also related to the Scottish. And then we have the Welsh, and they're more southwest. And then we have the French, or the Norman French. And then lastly, we have the quote-unquote original settlers, which would be the Celtics or also some of the Anglo-Saxons. That's the snapshot of all the different languages that are there. And so we're going to take a look at some of these languages a little bit more, and we're going to see how these things changed as things move forward. The Celtic language, or the Celtic language, had very little impact on the development of English, and primarily this was because it was not written down as much. It was also the older language that had been superseded by the newer languages that had come in. So there are a few words that are out there that are actually Celtic words. There are many place names in England and that are Celtic or Celtic in nature. But many words that are actually brought into the language and kept are not there. So we have few loan words from that language. Latin, however, has many loan words, many words that were brought in, not only just words, but you'll see later on that there are certain morphemes and some of the structure of the language, some of the syntax is also brought in. So these Latin came in actually during the wars with the Romans when they tried to take over the island. This is back even 1,000 years before this, and they had settled and lived in the southern half of the island. And they would leave at around 44 or 66 AD. And but after these people leave, of course, then there's all the things that are going on that we've already studied. But the language was initially there. Now, when the church now starts sending missionaries into England, okay, we have the beginning of a second surge of this language interaction with Latin and with the Brits who are living on the island. It was primarily the language of learning and primarily the language of the church. The church, when they came in, there were no learning institutions that were around. So the church began not only to teach people about who Jesus was, Christianity, but it also began to set up monasteries and abbeys and learning centers throughout as they moved forward and moved north, and they became learning centers. Of course, what were they teaching? They were obviously they were teaching the Latin, but these words were then being introduced into the language as they went forward. So that was a great boon for the English language as it's taking in these new words from Latin. The Norse language, which again was more of the north central type of area, like in Northumbria, and to the north of that, those people who used that language primarily there were not necessarily the ones who were writers. And because their language was not written a great deal, it also signed their death warrant, as it were, because a language that is not written down is a language that eventually goes away. And that's what's happening. That's what happened with the Norse language. Which brings us to the other languages that were there. We have French, or Norman French. Bear in mind that when you had France, you had this section on western France where the Normans came and lived and got ready to come over and take over England, which they did. So they spoke a version of French, but it was more of a Norse combination. And they came over, okay, these Northmen, after they were living in the northern France for a while. Were also called Anglo-Normans, right? From about the 12th century, after 1066, when they took over, they imposed that language on the aristocracy. So the elites were bilingual. They had to speak English, and they also had to speak this Anglo-Norman. So those were the major languages that were there, okay? And so you can see that there were a lot of languages that were going on here. The major languages, of course, was the English, the French, and the Latin. And, of course, there were all the other more regional ones that were going on. And you can see that it's a very multicultural situation. Again, you've got the Picts and the Scots and the Norse and the Anglo-Saxons and the Welsh language, and of course the language of the church and the French. It's a hodgepodge of all these different languages that do have to interact, especially in a larger urban area and especially at the higher levels of society. And so that's some of the reason why you have this multicultural, multiliterary thing going on in the Middle English that's causing a great change in the language. It also means that during this great change, you have some languages that are not going to survive, and that's just the way of languages. Not all languages survive. The interactions do exist, and they do cause some death in languages as well as strengthens other languages. Let's take a quick talk, a little deviation here into what they call language death. Now, as I mentioned before, the Norse language pretty much died off after this point, primarily because it wasn't written down. No one speaks or uses a language anymore. That's what they call language death. When I was taught in grammar school, they taught Latin, even though Latin is a dead language. It's not used anymore. It's not spoken anymore. Many people study Latin so that they can use it to learn other things and have an advantage of learning things like cognates and word roots and that kind of thing. But it's a dead language, Latin. Norse was the same way. Now, I got a question for you. Is language death bad? Is that a bad thing? Is it bad that a language dies? You'll note that there are some people who try to preserve their language. There are Native Americans who are trying to preserve their language. There are other people as well. Years ago, there was a movie that came out called The Passion of the Christ. And it was spoken in the language that Jesus actually spoke, which was the language of Aramaic. And very few people speak it today. There are people who are trying to preserve this language. We don't want this language to die. But is that a bad thing? Okay, let's get some information here just to let you know. About 6% of the languages that are spoken are the majority of the people who speak them. 94% of the people in this world speak the six primary languages. The opposite is also true. Okay, the largest language by population are languages like Mandarin or Chinese, which is almost 1.4 billion. Hindu and Urdu is 590 million. We've got Arabic, which is about 470 million. English, which is about 530 million. Spanish, 390. So those are the major languages. You've also got like 133 other languages that are spoken by very few people. A lot of this information I got from the Washington Post. We'll take a quick peek at that here. We'll take a look at how this is here. This is their article. And the main picture that I wanted to show you is this image right here of the main languages. It's quite interesting that you see these are the major players that are going on here, and you've got a lot of smaller ones here. Part of my family background is Italian, and now there's only 67 million people who speak Italian. Another part of my family background is Japanese. And so you see these languages are much smaller. Don't know if they're growing or not. Actually, I'm pretty sure that Italian and German and Portuguese, a lot of those languages are not growing because their populations aren't growing. So you see, though, that a lot of the people in the world, the majority of the people in the world, speak only a few languages. So all of these smaller languages, and we'll zip down here to take a picture of some of these smaller languages, are not being spoken. You'll see English is spoken in 101 countries. English is spoken in many different places. Anyway, they have this great little graph here that shows all the major and minor languages. And so you may want to go just take a peek at the article just to go look at that. Another thing you could do as far as looking at what are the major languages and the minor languages is simply just to go to Wikipedia and take a look at the numbers of people and the numbers of languages that are being spoken and where. This is just a summary from August of this year, which is 2015. And you'll see that English, of course, is the top ones there, but then we have Chinese, right? We've got Chinese and Hindi and Arabic and Spanish, and these are the same ones that we just looked at earlier, right? These main languages. So it's a similar type of thing. You've got Malay, and I don't even know where that is, but that's Malaysian. That's you've got Portuguese, Russian, Indonesian. There's Bengali, which was one of the number ones that was up there, and then French. And then things drop off more precipitously. You see the top ones, though, are English and Chinese as far as using Wikipedia. That's just another way that you can go look and see which languages are the more major, which ones are being used more, and which ones are being used less. So just another place that you can go and take a peek at that. Here's another place that I thought was quite interesting. This is a website entitled Endangered Languages, and you can explore their map of major languages throughout the world. So here's a global picture of languages throughout the world, and then the numbers of people who are actually speaking this language. Like, for instance, this one here, which I've never knew even existed. I've never even heard of it. Mika Ski, which only has 2,700 people speaking that language. Let's go in the middle of here, in the middle of Libya. There's another one that's red, which I believe is very endangered, right? It's virtually extinct. No one speaks that language anymore. Pana, 7,800 speakers. What do we have here? Kagoro, 15,000 speakers. Oh, that's a little more, but I mean, that's under 1 million. And so as you look at the picture, as you look out at the whole map, it's amazing that you see all these different languages, and most of them are not being used by people. Most of them are very few people are using them. Sign language. Well, we don't care about sign language necessarily. Look at that. Fewer than 10,000 people. Aragonese. Never heard of it. But it's a great place to come look and see at how few languages actually exist out there. So again, is it bad that these languages are going away? What is the downside of it? What is the upside of it? So the questions that I'm going to be asking you, and I'd love to get a response from you. You can shoot a response down below, or post it somewhere that I can get to it. What's lost if a language dies? Some will certainly say, we can't let this language go because we're going to lose this culture, we're going to lose this identity, we're going to lose this understanding of humanity if we let this language go. Of course, the opposite are going to say, what's gained? If we let this language go, we can focus on other things. We can still look at it from an historical or anthropological point of view, but then we have better communication. We can change the lifestyle of a particular culture because we're changing the language. So there may be something gained to letting that language go. And then, of course, there are the people who say, so what? If it's there, if it's not there, let them decide, and it's no big deal whether a language goes or doesn't go. So actually, it's a question that I have because there are some people who very much want to preserve their language. You speak to any foreigner who comes to this country, what do they teach their kids? They want their kids to continue speaking their language. Now, that wasn't the case when I was growing up. Not so much me, but when my father was growing up. His parents came from Europe, and when they came here, they told their kids, don't speak your native language. Speak English. And they refused to teach their kids that language. I don't think it's that way today. Today, they want to preserve that language. So you've got kids that are going to schools today that are multilingual or bilingual at the very least because their parents speak another language. So, question, should we protect it? Should we preserve that dying language? Or should we have a DNR? Do not resuscitate. Let this language die. There's no need for us to try to preserve it. What do you think? Is there good? Is there bad to it? What do you think? All right. Getting back to our little discussion here on moving from Old English to Middle English and all the languages that are involved at that time, and of course the fact that some languages are going away like Norse. We got to have these contact of different peoples and different languages, and it's going to be impacting what's going on. Now the contact is occurring where? Amongst people, and they're occurring in social contexts, social classes. So you've got most of this contact is going to be in the middle and upper level classes of people where there's this interaction. Sometimes this interaction is going to involve bilingualism, someone who speaks two languages. Now some of these languages are intelligible. There are some of these languages are similar enough that you can pick up things that are going on and you can have some type of relationship, some type of reaction. Italian and Spanish, or Italian or Spanish and Portuguese. There are a lot of similarities both in structure and in vocabulary and morphology, that there's a lot of communication that can happen even though they're separate languages. Things like English and French, however, there's not a lot of similarity, especially at this time, and so they're going to need to have somebody who's actually bilingual. And so what's going to be happening here is when you have something where their languages are very disparate, very separate, you're going to need to have somebody who can understand both languages. And that happens here where you've got groups of people or certain individuals who can be that intermediary to have that communication that's going on. So that contact person is kind of necessary. Times where you don't need it, but there are times where you do need it. So French and English were not mutually intelligible. They required someone to be bilingual. Now, eventually, these two are morphing together into something that's more useful and more helpful because of contact with loan words and borrowing other things and moving things around with language. Okay. Now, French eventually becomes a minor character in England. Okay. Even though they take over, right, and they have control over things, eventually the English that the English people had spoken begins to filter in and become the primary language in the aristocracy. Although originally French was required in the aristocracy. Okay, so that's why you read in certain places that during the invasion, the French conquered the English. Yes, they did at 1066. They conquer, but it's the English language that conquers the French language, because English subsumes many of their words and then eventually takes over as the primary language in the upper class, in the elites. And eventually there you'll read that there's actually a king who decrees it. We'll get to that later. Other languages that are here, of course, is that the language of the church, Latin, the language of books and learning. And so during this context situation, you also have the learning center, which of course is going to be pouring words into English, because that's the place where people are learning and actually having things written down. Eventually what happens as well is that these written words begin to have an oral life. You begin to speak in these written words. I don't know if you've ever spoken to people who are very bookish. They use their book language, their book words in their conversation. Just part of what was going on. And so that's what's happening here. Latin words, Latin ideas, Latin morphologies even were being incorporated into language and discussion and debate. And that's also adding to English. English is growing stronger. So they're borrowing words, right? They're borrowing words from French. They're borrowing words from Latin. They're borrowing words from the native languages that are on the island. And so the language, of course, is growing. English is growing and changing. Now, some way that we borrow, two basic ways that we borrow. We borrow because we like a word. We get a loan word. We take this word and we want to add it to our vocabulary. Maybe it's because it's a word we don't know. We've never seen it before. In English, in American English, we have the word popcorn, which we stole from, which we borrowed from the languages of the people who were in America, or things like teepee or wigwam, tomahawk, all these different types of words that we borrowed because we didn't have those words, so we appropriated them. Those would be words that we borrow. We also can have words that are forced on us. Okay, these are like words that we don't necessarily want, but we don't have much of a choice. And so borrowing is when I take a word from you. I steal a word from your language because I want to use it. I incorporate it into my language. Forcing it on somebody else would be called an imposition or interference, and that's where the second language user, okay, the second language speaker, probably someone who has power, like after a war, language is forced upon you. And they push a word onto your language. And so you don't have much of a choice. It's being imposed upon you. Okay, that's a problem that we have there. But loan words can be borrowed or imposed. Obviously, the better one is borrowed words. And so, anyway, that's the way things were happening during that time, and it happens even today. Any borrowings or impositions won't impact the language unless it's accepted everywhere. So, although a language can change and it can borrow, if it's only borrowed in a small location, it's not going to be a big deal. If you look back in the 1960s, the quote-unquote the hippie generation, there were dozens of words that they created. You may know of words like groovy, but you go look up on the internet words from the hipster generation, from the hippie generation. They had all these words that we don't use today, that were never incorporated into the general language. Okay, we have other words that have been borrowed and brought in, and they are our words now. Food words, for example, like sushi is a word that's now part of the English language. Karaoke, which is a word that we borrow because from a word that we didn't have this word and we thought it was cool to have it. I guess at some point these words started to be cool as well. Today, though, we don't borrow as many of those types of words as we used to. We're creating a lot of our own words just through new things that happen, things like technology and science that are creating lots of new words. But we're still borrowing words. And we could also be borrowing words that have a similar meaning. This is what they call loan translation. Do I have that here anywhere? Yeah, we'll get to that a little later. Let's take a look at some of the language and which language components transfer more easily. We have, like I was mentioning before, we have vocabulary. We get lots of vocabulary coming in. Well, that's because vocabulary is less stable. It's more volatile, therefore it's allowed to come in more easily. Phonology, however, sounds don't come in as easily. What will happen is we'll hear a word, for example, the word sukiyaki, and we'll take that word, if anybody knows what sukiyaki is. Or we'll take the word sushi, okay, and then we'll change it so that it fits our sounds. A great example, again, is the word karaoke. We've modified the sound so that it fits us. The actual pronunciation is karaoke. But we're not going to say karaoke. We changed it to be karaoke. Because why? Because phonology, sounds are more set in stone in a language. They're harder to change. Vocabulary isn't. We took in the word vocabulary, but we didn't take in the sounds. Okay? The greater the contact, the greater the impact on language, especially on the less stable elements. Well, again, when a language is being imposed, there's going to be change, just like what's happening here in Middle English. You've got some things that are being imposed on them, like French. You've got some other things like Latin that are being spread throughout, and of course you have all the languages that are there. You got these changes that are going on. But some things are going to change more quickly, and those are going to be the less stable elements. You also have things like I already mentioned this. Lexical transfer is the most common type of transfer. Words transfer. Morphemes can also transfer. Okay, if you remember, a morpheme is something like illogical. It's a Greek morpheme, and we have appropriated it into our language, and we can now use it. Ology, right? O-L-O-G-Y is another one that we can take in. Which is, again, is Greek, means the study of. So you've got the phonology, so that's one that's brought in. Those are going to be less easy to come in. Changing a morpheme, adding a morpheme so that everybody uses it, and people are going to be, oh, hold on, that's a little harder to grab. Taking a word is one thing because it's less stable. Okay. Other possibilities are phonological, syntactical, where syntax changes. And then orthographic, where we add a letter or we take away a letter. Very hard to do that today, by the way, especially because of the printing press. That we have a lot fewer graphemes that are changing. You'll note that in Old English and before Old English, there were many changes in that. But they're not that way anymore, again, because of the printing press. Some other impacts here. Oh no, let's tickle the impacts here. Look at this. In Old English, 50 to 60,000 words. Okay, by the time we get to Middle English or the end of Middle English, we've got 125,000 words. That's double. The number of words that were in the language doubled because of the interactions of France and the church and then the surrounding peoples that were already there. That's amazing. The language had grown so much. By the time we get to modern English or early modern English, there's 100,000 words, loan words that we have. It's a great, great amount. If you look at loan words in particular, there's 5% of Old English are loan words that we get from somewhere else. By the time we get to modern English, 70% of them are loan words. It's crazy the amount of words that come in because of the interactions. We also have loan translations, where the idea of a word is translated, and actually the ideas of the actual words are translated. My favorite example is the word Superman. Superman, we have this idea of us who Superman is, but if you go back and look at the German literature, Übermann or Übermensch is the actual Superman, the man above. Has a different meaning, okay, but we've taken that word. We have words like a skyscraper, which is a French word. Buildings that touch the sky, and we've taken those actual words, and in French they're not the same order, okay, we switched it around. Scrapes the sky, which is what they would call them. We switched it around and had to make something called a skyscraper. But that's a loan translation, not the exact word, but the idea we take and we use their words to have a meaning for it. And then we have semantic loans, where we borrow a form, but it has a different meaning. Okay, we borrow a form, but it has a different meaning. Different things that can transfer. Nouns most often are going to transfer because they're easier to understand. Okay, we have some adjectives that can transfer, harder to transfer. Adverbs are even harder to transfer, and verbs. Anyway, those are the basic ones that type of transfers. All right, what are the consequences for the English language? Now, I've already said that some of the consequences is a growth in vocabulary. Consequences is a change in some of the morphemes that are being used in English. Okay. Let's look at a couple others here. There are some inscriptions that provide an excellent source of linguistic history. Some things that we had found that have inscriptions that are written on them. One of them, and I forget exactly what it's called, but it's this inscription that has around it, it has all these different words, and the words are written in Old English using Roman script, okay, which is, again, not normal. Old English should be using Old English script, but hear this, showing you the mix of languages. It's Old English using Roman script, and it has Norse words and Latin syntax. Okay? I would look at that and think, that's a mess. But it gives you a picture of what was going on with language at the time. Okay? Something to remember, linguistic change occurs through 1,000 small individual changes. People who are making choices, okay? And so what's happening is this evolution of language because of the way people are using language. And sometimes a change results in a wave of change, and other times a little change is only local or it doesn't change anything at all. In fact, I bet in your own families you have family words that you use that are only in your family. Right? It's a language, a word that you use, and it's in your family. It has not spread to everywhere. Sometimes that thing happens. And that's what's really going on here with all these changes. The consequences being that you have this mix of language. English is now becoming richer with all of the extra things that are happening in Latin and French and, the Anglo-Saxon, the Scottish, the Picts, all those things that are coming together. Another thing that happened is that English moved away from being synthetic, moved more toward analytic. And if you remember, a synthetic language has a lot of bound morphemes that tell you what it is, tell you where it belongs, tells you whether it's the subject or the verb, or whether it's a noun or an object or a subject, and those were all connected to the words, okay? In English, we don't have many of those. I say the ball, you know it's a noun, but there's no special thing that says, hey, this is a noun. If I say like, I love that word like, now I can say he liked it. like if you're using something like Facebook. Well, that really means you clicked on an icon, as opposed to he liked it in the past. He doesn't like it today. Different change in the word, but it's becoming more synthetic. All those endings were now dropped off. You'll find those endings more in German or in Japanese, but you don't find them anymore in English. They used to exist in the past, just like they used to exist in Norse. The interesting thing is that while the Norse and the English, while they were interacting, they saw that they had all these similar inflectional endings, and rather than try to pick which one to use, they started dropping them off. They started not using them. Oh, so some of the consequences: greater vocabulary, a simplified, more analytic style English, so those, and then of course the growth of the language itself. Okay, language contact is all about people and cultural contact, and that was what was happening during this time. Very grateful that we're seeing a move to less inflection, more standardized things that are going on in Middle English. Middle English is still hard to read. You're not going to be able to do that, but some quick thoughts to consider, and I forgot to talk about this, so let's do this real quick. How does this view of language, from Old English over to the Middle English, how does this view of the English language differ from your view when you looked at language before? In your neighborhood, how many languages are spoken? I think for most of us, it's not many. Certainly not as many as that you see around here. So how does your view of English differ from what you see here? And question 2, what do you think about language death? Should we preserve a language or shouldn't we? Would it bother you if your language died? Let me know what you think. Shoot me some messages down below or in an email. And that's all I have for this today. I want to thank you for stopping by, and if you do have any questions or concerns, you can shoot them down below. Talk to you later now. Bye-bye.